So I get to follow the cool guy. I mean, I'm in a suit and he's in a leather jacket, and I'd much rather be in his attire. David said, I didn't know there's a lot of similarities in our two companies. We were founded in 1912. We are probably one of the largest engineering and construction companies around the globe. We're currently in 103 countries, 60,000 direct employees, and about another 250,000 subcontractors and support organizations on our jobs around the globe. We're probably the one organization of our kind that does have the breadth of market, from doing refineries and gas processing plants around the globe to pharmaceutical plants for life-saving drugs, as well as supporting the U.S. government, the DOD and DOE, and we actually run or participate in the running of 3 of our national labs, and I would share my opinion of how dire of a educational opportunity that provides. And I want to just give a couple of comments here just to kind of balance things here. We've got a lot in front of us right now, right? G20 is this weekend. The Brexit vote is December the 11th. The U.S. Fed may raise their rates again in their December meeting. Some people believe that economic growth has peaked and will continue to slow as we get through 2020. And a reminder that oil is playing a bigger and bigger role in terms of the strength of America. I think one of the things that Chad talked about was energy strength and energy policy, and something that's very, very important. Last night on the tables I saw labor, the national labs, academia, and industry noted as part of those partners. And I would argue that the nonpartisan voice of this group is really the criticality that we face today in getting the folks across the hall or across the way to do what we need done in terms of setting those policies. I would like to thank Sam and Debbie for the invitation to be here. As I've said, we've been around the globe and we see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And right now, one of the biggest things that we see is that the mega project is here to stay, and how we actually execute those programs and policies are key to bringing back manufacturing in North America. Anecdotally, about probably 12 or 15 years ago, Andrew Liveris of Dow said that they would never do petrochemical manufacturing in the United States again. Well, guess what? On the back of the shale gas phenomenon, that's not true. We've actually built 3 plants for them in the Gulf Coast. And again, the return of manufacturing in the United States is alive and well. When you think about the complexities of the things that we have to do, and I'll get into a little bit more detail than Matt did on some of those items, there is a responsibility that we all have in terms of setting that policy and not just expecting that our voice is the only thing that matters. But tax reform, I think, was one of the biggest booms that we've seen in the American economy in quite some time. And the National Association of Manufacturers, of which I'm the incoming chair, 86% of the manufacturers said that they intend to increase investment based on the tax policy. And almost 72% said they plan to increase wages or benefits, and 77% said they plan to increase hiring. When you think of those things, those policy statements that are made, those policy moves, that's absolutely critical as we move forward. And it is true that according to the World Economic Forum, the U.S. ranks first overall in global competitiveness in their index. The question is, how long will that remain, based on the fact that we have an outdated national infrastructure, we have an unstable regulatory environment, we have a need to create fairness in the global trade markets that are there. I would consider it we have a crisis in education and a lack of workforce training for all potential barriers and maintaining that position in the world. When we think about infrastructure, I'll make a prediction here. We will have an infrastructure bill next year. and it will disappoint every one of us here today. This is a passion that I have. Obviously, we do a lot of infrastructure programs around the world, but it's not just filling potholes. Infrastructure in today's world and across the way needs to be thinking about 2060, 2080 in terms of what that infrastructure needs to be. But I'm afraid the process and system, and someone talked about the structural change needed, Dr. Crow, I believe it was, the structural change needed in how we set the priorities. I would argue that today, there's no question that the American Society of Engineers has given us a D+. I mean, that's pretty damning in and of itself. And there's an estimated $4 trillion in projects that are needed based on what that is. And frankly, we rank 11th in the world in the quality of our infrastructure today. But it's not about filling potholes. It's about what is that broadband capability going to be. It's what, you know, if we think about Chad's example, you know, it's not about filling cars with gasoline anymore. It's about what else we use that. I was going to say Shell may be a new REIT, a real estate investment company, as opposed to an energy company if some of that comes true. I do like the combustion engine, but I'm an old timer, so there you go. But I think the fact of the matter is there are opportunities to deal with this imbalance and correct what I think is a stagnant policy. Commerce relies on modern transportation systems to move the goods and people. The lack of current and available federal resources cannot be an excuse for falling behind. There are example after example of where people have had the courage to push things forward on critical assets. One of the programs that we're working on right now is the replacement of the Tappan Zee Bridge in New York. Now we think, okay, that's about traffic, it's about moving people around. Well, not many people realize that 40% of the fish market in New York go across that bridge every day. So think about the jobs and the capability, just the simple things. I know this sounds simplistic, but the fact of the matter is there's critical assets around the globe, and specifically in the United States, that are woefully behind in terms of their ability to push commerce. There is no port on the eastern seaboard that can accept the super large carriers today. What are we going to do about that? So when I think about across the way there, some of the setting of priorities is the criticality of their job, and I think their job is selecting winners and losers. Problem with a lot of the reason you're going to be disappointed in the bill is there's going to be a lot of things that local politicians need to get reelected. I know that's not popular to say here in D.C., but it is factual. And there will be projects that absolutely do not push us towards the future in terms of infrastructure or the fact that commerce needs to be what drives that. It's forcing states to actually step up. And I'll get to some of the funding opportunities here in just a second. But when you look at the state of California and the infrastructure bill that they had on the ballot, as well as the South Carolina putting a gas tax on, those are, at least the South Carolina gas tax was unheard of. It was actually vetoed by the governor and overturned by the legislature. But again, there's got to be a funding source towards that and a priority in funding the Highway Trust Fund, which is scheduled to be bankrupt by 2021. But again, the federal government has a role to play here, and they have to look towards the priorities that are necessary to drive commerce and not necessarily individual needs and uses. But when you look at the funding sources, there's many, user fees, gas taxes, and the like. But the fact of the matter is, I believe the public-private partnership approach is the approach of choice in today's market. Now, I know the administration doesn't like that, but the fact of the matter is it's absolutely working in today's environment. If you live here in the D.C. area, the I-495 and I-95 express lanes is one of those public-private partnerships that we performed here, as well as the Purple Line Rail project here in the D.C. area, which is absolutely phenomenal when you think about the tens of thousands of square foot of commercial real estate that is being developed around this facility that won't be active until 2020, I think it is. So again, the P3 market works. There's 3 light rail programs that were done under public-private partnership, which gives me a good segue into the next comment on regulations, or at least the challenge. We did the Denver light rail from Stapleton to central Denver. That project, from proof of concept to cutting the ribbon, was 12 years. Now, I will give a shout out on the Tappan Zee Bridge to the governor of New York. He basically saw that they had the need, and he absolutely pushed the administration, who did not want to do the loan guarantees on that bridge, and now you have a safe bridge that is already in operation and safely carrying both commerce and people across the Hudson River. I will tell you, having been on a boat underneath the old one, if you knew what you were driving across, you would not be a happy person. But the fact of the matter is, public-private partnerships do work. Now to regulation. As I said, it takes too much time for those priorities to raise their head, and certainly it is an issue that we're dealing with on what I would argue is moving towards a stable and balanced regulatory system. But the lengthy permitting process for some of the projects, including the ones I spoke of, is taking way too long. So I am for regulation. What I'm not for is regulation that impinges our ability to create the kind of infrastructure that we need to move the commerce that I talked about. And I think that needs to be the main issue to deal with. According to an NAM survey this year, more than 37% of manufacturers spend at least 7 hours each week on paperwork to comply with regulations, and almost a quarter spend more than 10 hours for absolutely no benefit. And if they don't do it, all they're doing is they're opening themselves up to heavy fines. But I am optimistic that there is a slowdown in rulemaking. I think the president and his administration has done a very good job of requiring the retirement of those before you bring one in. I think that should continue. But again, good, solid regulatory environment is a positive thing for this country, and something that I'm not suggesting we get away from. But it has to be sensible. It has to be bipartisan legislation to remove the uncertainty in the process. Think about investors. You know, unfortunately in today's world, they have a very short attention span. But when it takes 12 years to do a light rail program that's basically 20 miles, takes over a decade, that's not sensible, and that's not something that I think is sustainable for this country. You know, Matt talked about leveling the playing field. Clearly, we operate in a lot of countries around the globe, and I would argue that we enjoy operating under the American flag around the globe in a lot of different ways. But we are facing the competition abroad that we know we've had, and now we're getting to a point where demanding that there be parity in terms of some of the things that we're dealing with. It was an interesting, just anecdotally, I was in a meeting in China probably 8 years ago where they unveiled their new 5-year plan. And their comment, these were academians that were giving this report. They said that they were afraid that if they didn't act quickly, they would have to deal with the same problems that the U.S. has due to subsidies. And that was 8 years ago. So we have some work to do in terms of leveling that playing field, and we have to actually walk the talk that I think that we're doing. But according to the Department of Commerce, 92% of exports from the United States face foreign technical regulations. Those regulations more than doubled between 2005 and 2015. So think about, we're deregulating, but who we're competing with are regulating. And they're driving up the cost of exporting to the countries around the world, and I think giving an unfair advantage to those foreign competitors. The United States has adopted 14 free trade agreements with 20 partners, growing manufacturing output from the United States in these markets, and we can promote free trade by developing more of these transparent, fair agreements. And while many in Congress and business don't agree with tariffs as a solution. There is bipartisan acknowledgement that the fundamentals of the commercial relationship between the United States and China require change. You think about NAFTA, right? When NAFTA was formed, that didn't exist. I'm stealing this from our chairman from last night, if you were there. NAFTA didn't exist. I mean, this didn't exist when NAFTA was put in place. So do we think that these programs and agreements need to be modernized in terms of what today's economy provides? And I think the answer is a clear yes, and something that I believe that at least the tariff situation is creating the dialogue. We've operated in China since 1978. We were one of the very first companies in, and have done many, many programs and projects there. And we've developed some good competitors to the world market there. But I would go with Matt that I'd bet on America every day and twice on Sunday in terms of its ability to innovate, its ability to compete on a global basis. I've always said at American business, you just give us the rules and we can figure it out. And I still believe that today. And I still believe that as it relates to the U.S.-China relationship, which frankly is very vital, I think, to both companies. But again, we for too long let certain countries take advantage of us, and we need to take a hard look at how do we balance that piece of the agreement. Now, the fourth challenge that I would say is the human resource challenge. Matt talked about it, and I think making sure that everyone has the opportunity here in the United States is one of our obligations. But frankly speaking, over time, it's been impossible for us to continue to compete without a sound education process. I'm very happy that academia is here. And obviously, the university systems around the United States are the best in the world. We educate some of the brightest people around the globe, and we need to make sure that once they're educated here, they stay here. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of people that are being left behind that never see the doors of an elite university. I've also become the national chair of the Board of Governors of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America in January. And one of the statistics that really got me thinking about why I should be involved, and this was 12 years ago, 80% of the people incarcerated in America, think about it, 80% of the people incarcerated in America, federal, state, and local, read at less than the 4th grade level. When I said there's a catastrophe, there's nothing more, I think, poignant than that one point alone. Because think of the burden on society from a cost standpoint. Let's just put it in dollars and cents of that many people being incarcerated in America, total. If we could move half of those off of those roles into productive workforces, how much better would this country be? How much money would be available to pay teachers more? Things that we all talk about, but no one has the courage to actually implement. We've had to, in this last boom in the United States, particularly in the Gulf Coast, we've had to go back to creating our own craft training centers. And I can tell you that teaching welding is something we would like to do more often than we do, because in fact we're having to teach basic math and reading skills to do that. As Matt said, not everyone should go to college, but everybody should be honored in terms of the job that they choose. And I can tell you right now, if you're a journeyman welder for us in the Gulf Coast of the United States, you make over $120,000 a year. Last time I checked, that's upper middle class. But again, it's important that we look at the whole system, education system, not just the university system and its output. It's extremely important. The research that's done is absolutely paramount. The power we have from an educational perspective around the globe is unprecedented, and we should never give that up. But it's not the whole system. My middle daughter's an educator, and she reminds me that the first educators from 0 to 5 are parents. What are we doing to allow those parents to work effectively, but also provide them the opportunity to help their kids from 0 to 5 before they get into the school system? Probably not as much as we should. We all face I think the labor challenge and the talent challenge. Today, I think from a construction industry perspective, we're saying that 89% of the folks we need aren't available to us. The U.S. military will tell you that 70% of the people that apply for the military don't qualify because of their reading and math skills. Again, we are leaving a huge group of people behind when in terms of GDP growth, which I do think that needs to be our North Star, by the way, that was a very good statement, is going to suffer because we can't find the people and the talent that's there. The tech sector in Silicon Valley will tell you that 40,000 jobs a year go unfilled. But at the same point, we've got a housing challenge in that part of the world, but we also have an educational deficit there. But I think there's some bright spots, and I'll just talk about two quickly. One is the Manufacturing Institute's Heroes program. And what we're doing is we're setting up centers around a lot of the military bases for these returning veterans. And we've got our own veteran hiring program within our company. And I can tell you, they know how to show up on time. They've got the basic skills that you need to do the job that's there. They're trainable, they're dedicated, they're loyal. And I think all of us, whether it's academia, labor, or the industry sectors, we need to start focusing more of our attention on that population. The first facilities are in Fort Riley, Kansas, and Fort Hood in Texas. And I think they're good examples of taking advantage of a really solid relationship that we have. The other point I'd make is, I got to put a plug in for my University of South Carolina. I think Clements is in here. He's the Clemson guy. And yeah, I feel your pain, Mr. Michigan. We got beat by Clemson last week. But the fact of the matter is, programs that allow these people that are angry that they weren't able to finish or they couldn't afford to finish, the University of South Carolina has what they call the Palmetto program that is focused on those folks that have 2 or 3 years of college experience but have not been able to finish. Majority of it is online. We have the ability to teach at the military installations now, and it's a way of helping people get that skill, that new skill that they're going to need. The other point that I'd make is AT&T committed to retraining 185,000 people because of their business moving into a different realm. Now, it's those types of commitments I think that business has to make, but clearly the process and the structure needs to be amenable to let us accomplish that. So, just to conclude, we should recognize that our economy right now is strong, perhaps one of the strongest I've seen in my lifetime. But companies are making the investments in the facilities and in their people. In the current pro-growth environment, optimism is high, but optimism is not a strategy. As we are here today talking about the United States' ability to compete in the global marketplace, it's clear that we have some challenges. Educating our young children and investing in our workforce, bolstering our national infrastructure system, setting priorities. And in fact, I think the U.S. government has to select winners and losers in that regard. And that's not something that many people like to do, but there has to be a national priority set if we're going to get this right and not waste money. And I think that being good stewards of that money is extremely important. I think it's also important to recognize that there are solutions to many of these challenges. And it's not one of these things where we can just sit around and complain. We actually have to be motivated to be that change agent and encourage our friends that are part of the solution to participate as well. I'm really in awe of what you guys have accomplished and the message that you send. Partisanship has got us where we are. And I don't think anybody would agree that where we are today is a very positive place. So the nonpartisan basis of this entity, I think, is so critical, and you should protect it with all your being. But the fact of the matter is, As I said about American business, I'll say about America. You give us the rules, and we can beat anybody on the planet. So thank you very much.